You walk into a room and bump into someone. You say sorry, even if it was their fault. Someone interrupts you mid-sentence, and somehow you apologize. You ask a friend for a favor you absolutely have the right to ask for. You start with, "I'm so sorry to bother you, but..." That word, that reflex, it's always there, like a shadow you can't shake. But here's the thing nobody tells you. That apology isn't really about the bump or the favor or the interruption. It's about something much deeper. Something quietly installed inside you long before you were old enough to question it. And once you understand what it actually is, you'll never hear yourself say sorry the same way again.
Millennials, people born roughly between 1981 and 1996, say sorry more than any generation before them. Not just for genuine mistakes, they say it for existing, for needing things, for taking up space. Linguists have studied it, psychologists have written about it, and what they found is both fascinating and unsettling. This isn't just good manners slightly overused. It is a psychological response to a world that never quite made them feel safe enough to exist without permission. The story of why starts much earlier than most people think, in a childhood shaped by anxiety, performance pressure, and a terrifying need to be approved of.
To understand the millennial apology, you have to go back to the 1980s and 90s, the era of the good child ideal. Parents raised children with enormous conditional approval. You were praised when you performed, loved loudly when you succeeded, and when you fell short, the atmosphere changed. Not always through punishment, sometimes just through a quiet withdrawal of warmth. A silence that told you, you are too much right now. Children learn through pattern, through what happens to the room when they need something. And slowly, they learn that their needs are a disruption, that the safest way to exist is to shrink. Psychologists call this approval-seeking behavior. But what it really is, at its root, is a survival strategy. A child who learns that apologizing preemptively keeps the peace is a child who learns that shrinking is safer than standing. And that lesson migrates into the teenager, the professional, the person who bumps into someone on the street and says sorry before they've even registered what happened. The 80s and 90s were also the birth of performance culture. Standardized testing, gifted programs, constant evaluation against a standard you didn't choose. Children weren't just loved, they were assessed. And when you grow up being assessed, you internalize the assessor. Sorry becomes the reflex, the price of admission. When you apologize, even when you didn't do anything wrong, your brain experiences something. A brief, measurable sense of relief. This isn't a metaphor. This is chemistry. Every time there is social friction, your nervous system registers it as a low-grade threat. Your amygdala activates, stress hormones tick upward, and the moment you say sorry, the tension dissolves. The conflict doesn't happen. Cortisol drops, and your brain logs it. This worked. You have just been neurologically rewarded for apologizing. This is how habits are built at the deepest level, not through conscious decision, but through reward. The apology becomes a tool for emotional regulation rather than genuine remorse. The brain is essentially a prediction machine. It looks for what worked before and runs it again. If apologizing worked at 7, it will try apologizing at 27. If shrinking kept the peace in childhood, the adult nervous system will try shrinking in the office and in the relationship. It's not weakness.
It's a brain doing exactly what it was designed to do: survive. Millennials grew up at the exact moment the world became permanently, unavoidably visible. They were the first generation shaped by social media during adolescence, platforms that were, at their core, machines for social comparison. Every post was a performance review. Every silence, when no one liked, no one commented, was a verdict. For a generation already trained to seek approval, social media was the approval machine that never turned off. Studies consistently show millennials report significantly higher levels of anxiety than any generation measured before them. Not just about jobs or money, but social anxiety. The grinding fear of being misread, judged, being too much for someone. Chronic anxiety creates a constant state of social monitoring.
A running scan of every interaction for signs of disapproval. The sorry becomes a preemptive strike. You say it before anyone can decide you're wrong. You soften every statement. I might be totally wrong, but... so that if you are wrong, at least you already made yourself smaller than your own idea. This is preemptive deference, anxiety's most practiced trick. And here is where it gets uncomfortable. This behavior doesn't protect you from rejection. It just teaches the world to expect your smallness.
There's a concept in psychology called the fawn response. Most people know fight and flight. Fawn is the fourth response. What happens when a person learns to manage threat through appeasement, through agreeing, accommodating, apologizing, shrinking, through making others comfortable at the direct expense of their own needs. Fawning is survival disguised as politeness. And in a culture that rewards this behavior, calling it emotionally intelligent, professional, easy to work with, it becomes invisible as a wound. Nobody tells the chronic apologizer, what you're doing is not virtue. It's a coping mechanism that's outlived its usefulness.
This generation was handed cultural permission to be emotionally self-aware. The generation of therapy language, of mental health conversations going mainstream. And yet they were also handed a world that punished them for actually taking up space with those feelings. The generation most fluent in emotional language became the generation most afraid to use it without apologizing first. That contradiction produces shame, the quiet kind, the kind that says, who do you think you are to need things? And from that shame, the apology flows endlessly, not as accountability, but as self-erasure.
There is something in the millennial apology that is not just about millennials. For hundreds of thousands of years, being rejected by your group wasn't an embarrassment. It was a death sentence. Your brain evolved to treat social rejection with the same urgency as physical pain. The terror of being too much for someone, the impulse to shrink before being pushed away, is older than any of us. The apology, at its evolutionary root, is a signal. I am not a threat. I belong here. Please don't send me away. Millennials didn't invent this response. They inherited it. But a high-pressure childhood, an always-on digital world, and an economy that told them to earn their right to exist made it louder and more constant. And the pattern that kept you safe at 9 years old can quietly imprison you at 34. Unless you name it, unless you see it clearly enough to make a different choice. Think back to the beginning. You bump into someone, and before you've even thought about it, you hear yourself say the word, sorry. Now, you know what's underneath it. A nervous system trained by conditional approval. A brain rewarded for avoiding friction. An ancient drive to belong. A quiet shame that learned to dress itself as politeness. The reason this matters is not because apologizing is always wrong. Real accountability is not weakness.
Saying sorry when you've caused harm is one of the most necessary things there is. The problem is when the word becomes a reflex instead of a choice, when it's not accountability, but self-erasure. The question worth sitting with is not why do you apologize? It's what would you say instead if you believed your presence didn't need to be excused? That question is not comfortable, but the most important ones never are. And maybe that's exactly where change begins. Not with a resolution, not with a decision, just with a moment of seeing clearly.